Hey all. For the next episode of Conversations, I'll be talking to Tommy Garchitorena. This episode's a little different in that Tommy isn't as well known yet as some of the other guests. Tommy's a member of our team here at dYdX, and in the time we've spent working together, I've realized he's one of the most interesting, deep people that I know, so I wanted to talk with him. Tommy's perhaps the most optimistic and curious person that I know, which is something I've been aspiring to. This conversation centers around the way Tommy and I see the world, ranging from tangible to emotional to spiritual. I felt like I learned a lot, so I hope you enjoy as well. All right, Tommy. Well, thank you very much for joining me on the next episode of Conversations. How are you doing?
Good. Very grateful and flattered really to be invited to this. So
Yeah, of course. No, I'm happy to talk to you. So the main reason I wanted to talk to you is I feel like you are and also have the reputation of being one of the most joyful and curious people that I know. And I think that's high praise, obviously, but one of the things that has become apparent to me as I've started doing a lot of introspection is I think these are two things that are really big indicators of people that are pretty far along the path of life generally, if you will. And I think people get to these at different points, and you're even a good bit younger than me at this point, but I kind of feel like you're somewhat farther along the path than I am in some of these ways. And I respect that. But the first thing I wanted to really talk to you about is, where does the optimism come from? So for those who don't know Tommy, Tommy is here at dYdX, and he is definitely the most optimistic person I know. So yeah, where does that come from? Is that something you've always had? Is that something you think consciously about? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I'd say it's twofold. So the first is that I don't really stress about a lot of things. So there's like the 20-80 rule where you put 20% effort in, you get 80% of the way there. So I think about that a lot for a lot of like my decision making or things that could kind of potentially be stressful. So like, I don't know, like what route I'm going to take somewhere or what I'm going to wear, what I'm going to eat, whatever it may be. And then the fact that I don't really stress about those things allows me to kind of have that mindset. So if stressful things do happen, I'm not stressed because I'm already not stressing about other things. So it's not like something will stress me out. I'm just like not very stressed. So I think it's like, and then also when there are things that you do need to focus on, like work or relationships, then you could actually focus your attention on that, and you don't feel like you're bogged down.
It's kind of a matter of prioritization, like you're focusing your energy and your stress, if you will, on the important things.
Yeah. And it's so easy to honestly just get stressed out by all these different things if you focus on them or you put too much importance on them. So I think like people will laugh, like my apartment like isn't even like done. Like I've got like posters that are just lying flat. But it's like I'm like, all right, like I'm not going to stress about that. But then because I don't stress about that, I should probably have like a better looking or more aesthetically pleasing apartment. But like now I'm not going to be stressed out by something, and I'm clearly going to prioritize not being stressed.
So you're focused. It sounds like you're focused a lot on sort of the more negative side of it, where it's like eliminating the stress rather than like you're going towards something that is optimistic.
You know, there's this concept of absurdism. With Kafka, who was like a German, Austrian, maybe like writer, philosopher, and it just essentially just like talks about how absurd life is. And when there are like a lot of like ridiculously stressful situations, I will literally just be like, this is just so absurd. Like rather than it being like so stressful or so negative or so like even traumatic, it's like this is just so absurd that you kind of have to look at it in like a positive light. Like this is just like this is life. This is the absurdity of life, where it can be framed in a negative way, but it's more just like almost just like ridiculous. And that's more maybe like taught or practiced and just kind of a way you can't just easily frame something.
It's kind of like if something negative happens, potentially framing it in that way or focusing more on the absurdity of it. And you definitely know what it is, and it's definitionally bad.
I think, and like a good example would be like if you're stuck on like the subway for like I've been stuck on the subway for like 45 minutes in the middle of the summer, and you're drenched in sweat, and you're like, and everyone's hot and whatever, you don't know what's going on, but like I'm just like, this is just so absurd. Like you have to just think like you can't do anything about it. Like if you're just an outside observer looking at it, like it's almost like comical the fact that this is happening. And again, it's just like not anybody else, but like to the common observer, it's just like, that sucks. This is the worst thing ever. It's whatever, dripping sweat. You got to be somewhere, or whatever. Maybe you have no service, you can't communicate. But it's like, of course this would happen. So whatever it is.
Especially in those situations where you don't have control, like that seems a big piece of it. If there's something you can do about it, then perhaps you can take more action. But if you can't, then it's interesting because I usually frame that more as acceptance, and that's one of the things I've been working on more recently. Just kind of accepting the situation around you. But I almost frame it more the opposite way, where it's less so absurd and more so my personal belief is it all happens for a reason or it makes sense. So I'm curious, why the absurdity rather than the other side of it?
I think, to be honest, I think that it's a spectrum where like you can be upset, you can accept it, and then me, by taking it like one step further of being absurd, can almost look at it in like even a positive light. And obviously it's harder to do that with some things than others, but trying to frame that as not even just neutral but positive can kind of turn these negative situations into legitimately the opposite.
Interesting. So you frame it as like positive, but I feel like for me, it's hard to frame things as positive if I don't understand them pretty well, or like I don't have some reason to believe that they are positive. So it's interesting that the absurdity is a good lens for you to do that.
Yeah. And one other thing I'll say too, on like the maybe not joy or optimism, more so like gratitude, is I know a lot of people will do like psychedelics, myself included, to reach ego death or achieve this ego death. And it's almost like objectively a good thing across all of humanity. Like people want to like look at the stars because it provides ego death or whatever it may be. But like psychedelics are done because you achieve this ego death in like this very short amount of time. It doesn't take much effort or practice, whatever it may be. So, and it's impactful and it lasts weeks or months or years, whatever it may be. But I think that doing things or like having hobbies that kind of achieve these small ego deaths, like on a more day-to-day basis, is how I've also been able to be more like grateful. So like I'm very interested in like nature. So you could watch nature documentaries like from your bedroom and like you achieve like this ego death. Or as you know, like I love looking at history pictures at night, and now you transport yourself to like just like you can see what a slave looked like in Brazil in the 1880s, or whatever, like someone getting executed in World War II, or whatever, a fighter pilot in World War I, whatever it may be. Now you're like, wow, what an incredible experience this person went through. And it reminds you like you just know so little. And again, it's like another ego death. So interests, one, and then also like I like to run. So it's like there's this thing that I think that I'm good at, and it's just so hard every time I go out. And it suppresses my ego a little bit more.
It's like a humbling experience.
Yes.
But the ego deaths, I think that is a big part of it. But I'm curious, so that makes sense to me. I'm curious, first of all, how you would define ego death, because I think there are different definitions. And then second of all, I like the framework of small ego deaths, but I feel it's very hard to lose yourself generally in life. Like your ego is always following you around. And especially with some of these smaller things, there are these more powerful tools that you can use to certainly get closer to that. But in these experiences where maybe you're just observing something beautiful in nature or something in history or trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, you really have to transcend your ego. And I think that's something that most people have a hard time with. So maybe first of all, how would you define the ego death part of it? And then second of all, how do you get closer to that?
Yeah, I think defining ego death for me would be just like recognizing that really, and it doesn't have to be like some absurd historical event. It could literally just be like me to you or me to like a homeless person in the subway, like someone that like I'm in close proximity to, but like I legitimately, like I'm living in my own universe, you're living in your own universe, and like I don't know the first thing about, like you more so because I know you, like this guy sitting next to me in the subway, I don't know the first thing about him. He's got this entire complex life, whatever it may be. So ego death for me is just essentially just realizing like this is literally, like we all live in the same universe, but we literally live in a different universe. Like legitimately live in a different universe. Like I can't fathom the thought of like being a fighter pilot in World War I, for instance. Like like it legitimately, like it's just the most absurd thing. And then that's just whatever, it's 100 years ago. Imagine 2,000 years ago or 5,000, whatever it may be. So ego death for me is just kind of being like, and like you're cognizant of, like just, or everyone's cognizant of, but like consistently being cognizant that like I legitimately live in my own universe. Like it's like this is my world, I guess.
Yeah, there's an interesting duality to it where it's both an experience where you deeply connect with somebody else because you actually are going somewhat along the path of putting yourself in their shoes, being empathetic, but also it's that humility that you're talking about where you realize that you have absolutely no idea what it's like for somebody else. And I feel like that can feel scary or potentially unachievable to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And this was going to be the other core part of the conversation, but I'll bring it up now. I think this is pretty intricately related to curiosity, mm-hmm. The optimism, and I've also come to believe that curiosity is a really core part of the path and of losing yourself. But it's really hard. Like one of the things I struggle with personally is the fear that I will forget myself or kind of lose myself if I focus too much on other people. So I'm curious, where have you struggled with that yourself? Or is that something that comes more naturally to you? And it's like, yeah, I think most people would agree with what you're saying. Yeah, they don't have a good sense of what somebody else's life is like, but they would almost feel so overwhelmed by their own life where, okay, well, that may be, but I have to focus on myself first and foremost.
Yeah. I think there's two sides to it. So like on the downside, like I am a people pleaser. So like I avoid confrontation. Like I just like want things to be good essentially, okay. and you know that. So I can lose myself in that instance where it's more just like going with the flow, whatever, let it be, and that does mean that like I am not less of myself, but like my opinion or my opinion, I guess, is not voiced, so whatever, it just happens, and then I guess it could slowly erode away if that happens. But by knowing myself very well, I think that I'm able to be more authentic mm-hmm. than someone who not only is just like wants things to go smoothly, but just like wants everybody to like them or whatever it may be. So, and I think that that's pretty distinct, like just like not being confrontational versus like really wanting people to like you. And I like my friends and my family will agree that like I'm like quirky and I'll like say things that like maybe are absurd or like do whatever things that are just kind of maybe outlandish or just not normal. But it's just me being my authentic self because I've kind of come to grips with who I am and then like, all right, this is it, and now I'm happy with it.
Yeah, and that's really the key of it, is coming to grips with who you are and your authentic self. And I feel like most people, this doesn't happen until later in their life, if ever, probably for most people. So if you're willing to talk about it, yeah, I'm curious what that journey was like for you and where that came from. Was that something you felt like you always had a good sense of, or was that a specific journey you've gone on sometime in the past?
I would say, honestly, going back to, let me think about this. Let me think. So, honestly, I'll tie this back to the curiosity part. So, when I was younger, I was always interested in like whatever, like what tools were involved in like fire trucks or like animals in the ecosystem, whatever it is. And then as I got older, I became more interested in like the human experience, and like I became curious about that because like whatever, maybe I just wasn't exposed to people when I was younger, or like only had books, I wasn't speaking to people. And I think that as I got older, my curiosity kind of shifted from like things to people, or to experiences and to people. I was able to reflect and kind of realize like, wow, other people are so unique, and other people were able to kind of do these incredible things, and especially like very high achieving people too, kind of have their quirks and their mannerisms and are very authentic. And it's like, there's no reason that I shouldn't be. And it's easy to get caught up when you're a teenager, you're in college, there's like social media, or there's friend groups or girls or whatever it may be, where you're like, all right, I want to like be in the in crowd, or I want like followers or whatever it may be. But then as you get more as I got more interested in people, and like historical people and people today, whatever it may be, I realized like all of them are so interesting. And there's no reason for me to suppress my interests for some, like whatever, something that is fleeting, essentially. So I'd say it coincided with my being more interested in other people.
Yeah, I feel like that's fascinating because I asked you about you and your journey to become more aware of yourself and the more authentic version of yourself, and you talk about other people, which is interesting. That's certainly kind of the reverse of the way that I've normally thought about it. Yeah, I'm curious. I doubt there's one particular way to get to a lot of these realizations, but I've more had the experience of just kind of being generally like pretty fearful and overwhelmed in a lot of parts in my life, and going on a journey more to understand myself first and foremost. And this is just starting for me, and I think this is a reflection of that, but this has kind of led me to that place of becoming more curious about other people. So it's curious that you took almost the reverse path. But what do you feel like okay, you understand that everybody is pretty unique in their own way, potentially even living in their own universe as an extreme. But what did that make you learn about yourself as you learned more about other people?
I think it was largely that most other people are weird to an extent, in ways that they don't outwardly show, or people don't outwardly show in day-to-day interactions.
Yes.
And I think that like I am very weird. Like you're very weird. No offense. Yeah.
I
but
agree.
Like, yeah. And so for learning about myself is like I'm actually weird. Like, why was I suppressing this when I was in high school? Why was I suppressing this when I was in college? And not just, and like that's the first step. And then it's like, all right, you're weird, but in what ways are you weird? And then it's like, all right, I'm weird because I'm obsessed with, like I was obsessed with cars, and then I was obsessed with animals, and then I'm obsessed with like nature. So like I have these like obsessions. I'm obsessed with running, like whatever it may be. And it's like you need to unapologetically like pursue that. Like crypto, for instance, is like very niche. Like you need to unapologetically pursue things that you would normally suppress. So anyway, learning about myself essentially is that I'm weird, and that these things that I liked when I was younger, or like or do in my free time, are actually things that I should dive into and pay more attention to.
Yeah, that's been a big learning for me too. And for myself, I've always been somebody potentially unlike you that's been very socially awkward. So, and I'm a lot less like that now, still to some extent. But I've had the experience just for the first time in the past year of knowing a number of people deeply. And I think it really is that depth you have to get to with a person, where you realize what you just said, where everybody is weird and everybody has things about themselves that they likely don't accept, or at least don't accept to the level that they're openly showing them to other people. And that's been very interesting to me too. So it's curious that you kind of took that learning and applied it to yourself almost automatically, it feels like, where it helped you accept yourself as you accepted other people more. One of the things that's happened to me is, as I've learned more deeply about other people, is sometimes I'll have the experience of realizing that somebody under the hood is pretty different than what their outwards persona is. And most of the time, those things people aren't showing outwardly are hard to deal with, and are things that they potentially don't like about themselves. So I would have the experience a lot of times of feeling bad for them, or like wanting to help them, or potentially wanting to change them if I really didn't like it. So how did you get to that place, even if it's with other people, of acceptance and really just authentic curiosity to understand what they're really like without wanting to change anything?
I think I had read something once about how a lot of males are like, the bell curve for males when it comes to kind of just disorders in general, is much flatter than it is for women, for instance. And because of that, that's why there are more like psychopaths, but there are also more geniuses. And you also see that like that's why there are more criminals, for instance, but then there are more like whatever, like Nobel Prize winners. I'm sure that there's like whatever. There's institutional things also at play, but and I think that that I came to this realization that you can't have one without the other.
Yes.
And it's like, and like when I came to that, yeah, it was like, whoa, like, yes, this thing exists on this far end of the spectrum, but if I were to change this from this person, or like if I didn't like this part about this person, then this wouldn't exist. And without that, then I wouldn't even be able to enjoy the beauty of this end of the spectrum. So I think that when I learned that, and I think that I came to the acceptance that they have to exist together for this one to exist, that helped me kind of accept kind of maybe more negative things about people, because I do truly enjoy the positives about them.
Yeah, like you have to accept the bad with the good. I feel this is almost more of a spiritual belief that everything is balanced, and almost every person is balanced as well. So if you take an extreme example like that, like genius and insanity or mania, call it, yeah, I think these things actually are very close to each other. And as you know a little bit, I can speak to this personally too. So yeah, my father has bipolar depression, as you know, and just goes into these incredible manic states, but he's a very brilliant man. But in a lot of families, and this is studied, there is really high performance for the siblings and children of those people. So I do think these things are very similar to each other. And I feel like it's very hard for people to see that, because I feel it's kind of asymptotic. Like as you approach the edge of like true genius to flip a little bit and it's true insanity, it's really hard for people to deal with that. And even just intellectually, well, just, okay, I define that as crazy, I'm going to move in the opposite direction. So I'm curious if there were specific examples or experiences that you had to lead you to that realization, even if it's more like historical figures or people in your life, or where did you felt like you saw that?
Yeah, I'd say, honestly, just like a quick example off my head with historical figures, like for instance, a lot of like the people who brought math forward, whatever, hundreds of years in one lifetime, were people who were like recluses, and there were, or great writers with like, I don't know the name of it. There was a writer who locked himself in a castle that he built on his property and he didn't see anyone for 7 years, and he just like wrote all day. But he was this prolific writer, and he did great things. Or like Isaac Newton, whatever, genius, but then he spent half of his life, maybe even more, trying to turn, like as an alchemist, trying to turn all these chemicals into gold, and like it can't be done.
Yeah.
And like you can argue that is kind of manic. Like whatever, one of the smartest people ever. I can't imagine how much effort you put into that just to kind of come up with nothing. So personally, I haven't come across too many, to be honest.
It's rare at that level.
Yeah. It's tough. Like it legitimately is like they're like those people. I mean, they're the people who bring society forward, like legitimately. But yeah, like you said,
and I feel it is hard, and you know, everybody knows people like this in society, even like Elon Musk or something like that.
Yeah.
And potentially now it's arguable, but he's tipping over the edge a little bit, in my opinion, of kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But I feel like people have a tendency to look at either one side or the other of something, but not both sides, and especially not both sides, and ask themselves the question, interesting, how do these things relate to each other? Are they similar, or must some of these things exist at the same time as the other? So do you feel like that's something you just got from yourself? Did you get that from other people, or it just became apparent to you as you really genuinely, with curiosity, tried to understand who people are?
Yeah. One thing I'll say is, this is kind of funny. So my mom is like the sweetest person ever. She was an FBI agent for like 30 years, whatever. There's like the good guys and the bad guys. She was one of the good guys. So, but growing up, she always hated like certain, not I don't say hated, but very much disliked like certain artists or certain public figures, because they did like some absurd negative thing. And I grew up thinking like, oh, this person is a bad person because they did this thing, or they have this character trait, whatever it may be. But then as I got older, I was like, wait, this person also did this like pretty incredible thing, or these incredible things, whatever it may be. And then I realized like, whoa, like all these really polarizing figures, not all of them, but like these polarizing figures that were brought up, like have both this very negative thing and this very positive thing. So it is very easy to look at the negative and be like, whoa, like like this person is no, like no more, but then without looking at the positives that they did also. So I think it doesn't answer your question of like when did I overcome it, but I think that at least I was aware of it when I was younger, and then as I became more interested in people and people's backstories as I grew up, then I kind of realized,
just like you see that trend over and over and over again, and you must feel like there's some fundamental truth to this in every person.
You know, a lot of the times too is when I come across a new person, let's just say that I'll go to their I'll always go to their Wikipedia. I'll always go to it, and I'll be like, what was their early life like? For whatever reason, like that's like my go-to thing. Whether it's a writer, a historical figure, or an athlete, whatever it may be, it's like I'm just interested in kind of what their upbringing was like. And that's just kind of, and it's not only does it show upbringing, it also shows like whatever the personal life section. So you see like whatever crazy things they did, you also see what they grew up like, and a lot of times too that's correlated. So it's like this fantastic person had a tough upbringing, they achieved fame, they also did kind of crazy things. So anyway, it goes hand in hand.
So it's like seeing the full picture of somebody from both on a time spectrum early in their life to late in their life to the positive and the negative. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things we talked about recently is your brother's going through recovery with injury, and one of the things you said to me is, oh, you just have to be optimistic in these situations. I don't necessarily disagree with you, but I'm curious where this is coming from. Like, do you think that's more of a fundamental belief, or it's just like, oh, it would be too bad if you weren't optimistic in these situations? Because I feel like that's not how most people would approach it. Where is that coming from?
So Brian, my brother, had a bad snowboarding accident about a month ago. So he's, broke his pelvis, broke a bunch of ribs, had a major surgery. But I knew, honestly, because it was so negative, like, and it's obviously not as black and white as this, even though I make it as black as white as this, like, you have to be positive in the most harrowing times. Because, like, if you slip up a little bit, then it's the steepest hill. Like, it's legitimately the steepest hill. So it's like, and maybe not even being positive, but being aware that you need to be positive. So, like, I told him that, and then I would text him and check in on him and be like, how are you feeling? Or are you feeling good, like positive? Like, not that I don't care about how he physically feels, but like, I know that you have to constantly be checking your mental gauge of like your mental pressure, whatever it is, of constantly just checking in with yourself, especially in times like that. Like I will check in with myself every once in a while, not as much, but I just knew that given his circumstances, like, he needs to check in with himself. And like, honestly, I would apply it to like you have a very high, maybe not high pressure because you kind of have been able to decrease your stress, but you've got a very important job, let's just say. So it's honestly a similar parallel to that, where it's like you constantly need to be checking in with yourself because it's easy to slip. The default is to slip, honestly. So I'm not sure how that resonates.
Yeah, so it's sort of a matter of awareness. Like, just being aware almost from more of a meditative state of what is your mental state, and having that outside perspective, whether that's somebody else like you checking on your brother, or you doing that yourself to stay in this positive state. But this may seem obvious, but I'll push you on a little bit. Like, why do you have to do that? Like, what would happen if you did not have this positive outlook, or one did not have this positive outlook in that tough situation?
Yeah, I think that personally, and like even maybe just like societally, and not turn this into like a societal critique podcast, but I think that we're kind of wired or taught to kind of indulge our pleasures or indulge our wants or needs, whatever it is. Like, we live in like a consumer focused capitalist society, which is just good, increases the standard of living, but the focus is on us. And it's easy to change your values from things that are more family-oriented, relationship-oriented, goal-oriented, to things that are more about money or power, for instance, or, again, like followers, like things that are more like hedonistic, let's just say. And that not only is society kind of structured like that, but we're wired like that. Like, we're pleasure animals. So I think that I realized that the default state is to lean into that. So if you're not constantly checking in with yourself, then all of a sudden a few weeks go by and now you're like there's another saying, like, you are what you measure. Like, if I'm measuring like how much money I made, or how much of like what some monetary value, or people measure how good looking they are, whatever it is, you are what you measure. So now all of a sudden, like, am I like my good looks? I'm not. Am I my money? Am I something like that? And it's not that that is like an option, but that is the default, is to lean into these things because they're pleasurable. So,
Right.
so anyway, so things have to be, or I have to check in and kind of be optimistic and positive, because I know that the default state is not that. And if you go down that route, then it just leads to
Yeah, I
negativity.
really like that, and it's similar to things we learn in business too. Like you achieve what you measure.
Mhm.
For me, I, like most people, started my journey by just trying to be happy. Like I wanted to be happy, and I had this experience a couple years ago, as we've talked about a little bit, where I felt like I had pretty much everything external that I wanted, and I was like, "What the fuck? I'm still only 7 out of 10 happy. What am I supposed to do now?" And that led me on this internal journey of reflection. But for a long time, probably up until 7 or 8 months ago, I kept as my main metric that I wanted to be happy. And I got pretty close to that. Probably got to like 9 out of 10 happy or so on average, which I think is really good. But then I felt like I transcended that a little bit. And actually, the next thing I realized was there's more important things I can do than just being happy. And I want to be happy, but that can be more of a byproduct. And I changed my main metric to importance. Am I doing things that are important, feel important? And I think some of this is the practice of reflection and just seeing honestly how close you are to whatever your goal is. And part of it is how well can you measure that? I feel like happiness is easy because it's really, you said it yourself, like humans are pleasure animals. We know whether we're happy or not. Do you know whether you're doing important things or not? It takes a little bit more reflection to understand what exactly that looks like. But that was part of the journey. And then part of the journey was trying to do more important things. And I felt like I got pretty close to that. But at least for me, even that wasn't the end of it. And where I'm at right now is, how present am I? Like, am I doing things that really make me feel alive in the present moment? I'm not thinking about something else. And I'm around people that I love and care about, and love, happiness, importance all seem to be byproducts of that. So I'm curious for you if you feel like it is happiness still, if it's optimism, which you may define as slightly different than happiness, or something else.
Yeah. Actually, real quick, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So you went from happiness to importance to presence, but not that you left happiness, but you're like, all right, I need to put more focus on importance. And then now you're going to presence. Is it like equally weighted importance and presence? Like, how are you weighing the two? Or are you
Honestly,
like more so shifted?
I generally am a pretty hyper-focused person, so I'll focus on a small number of things exclusively. So it really actually is like I don't think about those things anymore. Like I don't really think that much about wanting or trying to be happy, or even whether I am happy at the current moment. So I only think about right now, am I present or not? So I do feel like in some sense it's a bit of a superset, like generally doing things that are more important will make you feel more fulfilled and happy, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not exactly the same thing. And it's almost like I've changed my outlook to life, for myself at least, in my own universe, for what I'm doing. So I would even say right now, like, I don't necessarily want to be that happy. Like I would rather just be very present and feel very alive. So it's kind of more like I've left those things in the past, at least for the time being.
Yeah. And when you say presence, just like more of what?
More, I think this is part of, it's hard to describe, but
It's not an
this is
act.
part of the, what I go through with these journeys is really trying to understand what does it mean to be present. And I define some of the symptoms of being present as being really clear-minded, not having thoughts, not having other things in the future, in the past that you're worried about or thinking about or even excited about. And I think you kind of know that when you see it. So one of the practices that's been helpful for me in any of these journeys is sort of a forcing function on reflection, just like writing down the 1 to 3 things in every day that make you feel most present, or that were most important or that made you feel most happy. So I think once you get a sense of what those things are, then you just keep doing more of those things and build up more of the presence over time.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense.
But it's almost it's like more of a meditation. Even when I'm talking to somebody or speaking myself, it's more, can I be so focused or so absorbed with what that person is saying or what I'm saying and how they're reacting to me that I don't have other things going on besides this one thing right now.
Yeah. And I remember you saying that you were very good at, I guess you said it here, but I know historically you've said that you're very good at focusing on things. So it's interesting because at least in those contexts, it was more like acts, like maybe it was coding for X hours, whatever it may be. Now it's like, all right, now it's more things that are maybe more qualitative or spiritual.
Yeah, that's definitely wise. And I think it's really important to understand what you are like innately and then how you can change that over time. It sounds like for you, the curiosity is almost sort of innate.
Yeah.
Like that didn't necessarily come from any particular event or person in your past. I'm sure it was shaped by that, but that's kind of where you start with. And I feel like I more start with, as you say, this focus, and I can point that at whatever I want. So for you, it's really learning and understanding things. Do you feel like that resonates? So that's right.
Yeah. Honestly, I think that's a great point. Like I'll use curiosity as a tool, like I said, like to be more grateful, to like to be able to know myself better, which I guess normally you wouldn't connect the two. Maybe you would, but it's like, yeah, that if that's my, honestly, like if that's my competitive advantage,
like superpower.
Take advantage of it then, yeah, at that point.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And one of the things you talked about is it seems like optimism or generally this outlook runs a lot in your family as well. So I'm curious, where did that come from? Is it innate in all of you? Is that something you got from one or both of your parents? Or why is it not just you and this entire family around you?
Yeah, so I'll say I'm not entirely sure, like truly, like at least I'll say like genetically ran through our family. So my parents got divorced when right after I turned 14. So I was 14.
Yeah,
brother was, and then your parents divorced as well.
Yeah.
You're the oldest of four. I'm the oldest of five. So I was 14, 12, 11, I think like 9 and 6. So within your siblings, similar, younger ages. So I think that the optimism for me came from knowing that at least at that age I had to be optimistic, because as like as the de facto role model, it was like if I wasn't optimistic, then my siblings would obviously not be optimistic. And even if I knew that it was a bad situation, you kind of have to fake it until you make it, to the point where like I just like became a more optimistic person. I'll say like, I mean, look, credit to my siblings. Like I was able to like kind of get through it. Like I was in college, I was in high school for a few years. I went to college. Like they like really, they did like an incredible job. Like they're who I am most proud of, honestly. Cause like, honestly, like I have similar genetics as them, similar upbringing as them, except they were younger when this divorce happened. A few of them had like, it affected them mentally worse than it affected me. They were able to get through it. So just like by virtue of those, just the obstacles that they were able to overcome, even though we lived similar lives, they were able to overcome more obstacles than me. Anyway, the optimism is because as the oldest, I was like, I've got to be optimistic right now. Yeah, like honestly, like my brother right now, he has to be optimistic. Like then, like I had to be optimistic. Like there was no not being optimistic at that point because it wasn't just me; it was 4 other people. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's giving me an interesting realization for myself. And I think even if one of my superpowers is the focus and a lot of other things about me are derivative of that, I think the reason why I'm so focused is because the reason like I have to be that way because I've seen all of this insanity and craziness around me, and I actually think I feel a lot of that myself. Like I think I actually sort of am a bit of a manic person generally. However, if you meet me and you tell me this is true, but I think most people I come off as extremely chill. But I think it's like I feel that within me, and like, oh, I see in my dad and other people what's going to happen if
Mm-hmm.
I don't control this or I am not focused. So I must be. So therefore, that becomes one of the core things about you. So it's interesting, kind of your circumstances or the situation and these things that you're forced into become the things that shape you.
Because I mean, look, like if that situation didn't happen, or if your dad wasn't that way, like maybe you wouldn't be as focused, and I wouldn't be as
Right.
optimistic. Like I can just explain what you said, but exactly, it's like who knows what we would be like.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's also interesting, a lot of these events or things generally, especially most people don't want to be like forced into something, right? Like generally you want to have choice, and I think that's an awesome thing, but a lot of times the trauma or the being forced into something is the biggest thing that'll forge you into whatever is the most meaningful or important thing about you. And I think there's a duality to that too, where that can go in a really positive way or a negative way where, look, a lot of people would be in that same situation that you were in and feel like they have to be optimistic, but they just can't be. And, then they'll slide down this slide of pessimism and feel bad about it because they weren't there for their siblings or whatever else. And I can resonate with that to a big way. So it is still, you have agency over it. It's just like the situation. It's also what we started with talking about, like the situation cannot be changed. It's just like, you're on the subway for 45 minutes, are you going to be happy or sad about it?
Yeah.
Or, your parents got divorced and your siblings are relying on you. Are you going to step up or not? Those things you can't change.
Yeah.
Accepting that quickly and moving on to, okay, given that, what am I going to do about it seems important.
Yeah. Shoot, what was I going to say? Anyway.
Yeah. No, changing the subject a little bit. So you touched on this before, but it's one of the things I'm curious to talk a little bit more about is you have this habit of going back and looking at pictures of history.
Yeah.
Like, where does that come from? Is that just an extension of the curiosity? Do you feel like you learn things from that? Or why do you do that?
Yeah. So for some backstory, every night actually I go on Reddit and I'll look at the history subreddit, and people post pictures of these historical photos. And I think so. At first, I became obsessed with history around college because of the human experience and what all these people went through. And it was fascinating reading about them, whatever, watching documentaries, whatever it may be. But at the same time, you're still kind of, like if you're reading a book, you're kind of imagining what they looked like, what happened, but not what happened, but you're imagining what they looked like. But now all of a sudden there's this subreddit where you can look at photos of people and really like clear images from whatever, 150 or plus years ago. Anyway, so I look at it every night because it honestly is like, it takes me to like people of sci-fi or like fantasy novels, whatever it may be. Like that is my kind of escape. Like it's like you look at this, like this. There's so many pictures I have, like I don't want to say seared in my brain, but like seared in my brain, just like incredible, just historical.
It makes you lose yourself in them.
Yeah, like truly lose yourself. Where like I can look at a photo for 5-10 minutes and it's just a photo, and like these thoughts of just like, what was life like then? What was life like for this person? What would they have experienced if they're this years old and they grew up, whatever, they're actually 40 years old, they grew up in 1830. Anyway, it's like, or where they grew up. So it's a way to kind of, almost like it's like my version of like sci-fi or whatever it may be, but it happened, and here's a photo of this person, and like how, like, and this is a constant thought that I have, is like, how incredible is it that I'm here 130 years later looking at this picture of this person who doesn't even know like a television will exist and they're like whatever after they're born. So it's just like, again, it's almost like another ego way of like suppressing the ego.
Yeah, but it's interesting that humans seem really drawn to this losing yourself in general, right? But I feel like there's more positive or at least constructive and more destructive ways to do that. And even a lot of the things that people try to get away from in society, whether it's scrolling TikTok or just watching Netflix or anything like that, it is losing yourself. But yeah, I'm curious why the history. So is it kind of the realness, like this actually happened and it seems more important because of that? Or is it something else?
Yes, I would say it's that, because I know that it really happened. Like I really don't read fiction novels, to be honest. Like, I'll read them. I'll look up, like, it's so cheesy. I'll look up like the top 50 greatest fiction novels, and I'll just like read those because I'm like, all right, I feel like I should just read them. But I'm not gonna like go on and read something that was on the New York Times bestseller. Like, I very much am interested in like the real world and kind of what's going on. So it's my way to kind of have this, like, it's escapism too, like to a degree, where it's like, all right, like, let me kind of escape for 30 minutes and just kind of go through this. And like you said, there are ways to frame it where it can be negative and it can be positive, I guess, like maybe not just depending on the medium that you use, but also kind of how you approach it. Anyway, I think personally, I think it's because it's real, and the fact that I like this feeling that I get. Honestly, it's not like I almost say it's maybe even an addiction of just like this feeling that I'm just this boy that lives in New York City in 2024, and there's this person who lived in 1830 and wherever, or 1940 in Germany. It's just so far removed from me that it's just such an incredible feeling that it's just like I'm grasping for that continuously.
That makes sense. So tying it together to potentially some of your underlying beliefs, one of the things you said that really resonated with me is you believe God is a being that wants to experience everything, is I believe what you said.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, and do you feel like that's related to a lot of the things we've talked about?
Yeah. So I guess my thesis, I'll say, on God is he's a being that wants to experience everything. So there was the universe, and it was void of life, but he needed emotion, and it makes sense that there is nothing greater than emotion. I think is my kind of conclusion. It's like you can have the highest highs, the lowest lows. There's different scenarios, whatever it may be, and God, and it follows that emotion follows consciousness. So there's like this intertwined belief that God created consciousness. So if you believe that, then it follows that like what is the point of consciousness, honestly? Because animals are getting along just fine. Like really the only plus one we have is that we have emotions. It's sure animals have emotions, but like we legitimately have emotions. So again, it's like, honestly, I should have touched on this God point when I was answering the last question, but it's the fact that the idea that there are so many situations, even like right now in this office, like everyone at dYdX has had such an insanely different experience. Like there are 7 billion of those right now, and there are billions more who have died before, and hopefully there are billions more that come afterwards, and they've been put in so many different situations when it comes to standard of living, culture, language. Some people were pharaohs, some people were building the pyramids, some people were alive at that time and they lived in Japan. They didn't even know that it existed. Like such differences in experience. And I think that, again, leaning into my curiosity, it's like almost why. Like I guess it's almost like a why. It's like these things are so, if everybody is their own universe and God is the creator of the universe, then clearly like there is this intertwining between everybody's experience and God. So for God to be able to kind of create these experiences and create these different situations, and him to be able to be any place and experience any emotion at any given point in time. Kind of rambling, but yeah, that's it.
That resonates a lot with me as well. And then I don't know if you believe this, but in a lot of religions, there's sort of that concept that a piece of God is within every individual, or at least every place that conscious is. So I feel it's very much the thing that ties us together, and that's also a concept that comes in a lot of religions. And I feel like that's also intricately related to the curiosity piece, where, okay, well, if God is like that, and some small part of that is what I'm experiencing now, then wait, like a lot of that is out there, right?
It's right here,
It's here and there, and in the past and in the future. So trying to understand and experience more of those things authentically, I feel like is intrinsically right, and I feel like that's kind of where it comes from, where I can see that.
Yeah, I actually was listening to a podcast recently, and there was this woman who's a Calvinist, and her words were that think his name was John Calvin. His belief was that every interaction with a human is an encounter with God.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it resonated so strongly with me, where it's like it's just so true. Like, it's, the more you, like you say, like, you know people on a deeper level, and you realize,
Mm-hmm.
like you know that there's so much complexity to everybody, but when you see how much complexity there is and experience it, it's just like, or even just like trying to fathom it, you're just like, wow, there is a piece of God in everybody.
Yeah, and it's so complex. I'm curious how you get from that conclusion to the conclusion that emotion is really key, or I think you've said to me at one point in the past that emotion is the strongest thing there is. How does the God piece relate to that?
Yeah. I'd say that I think that that different situations bring up different emotions, and it's almost necessary to have a new situation to bring on a unique emotion. So I don't think that an emotion can just be kind of viewed in a vacuum. Like, you need the context of someone's upbringing and the context of someone's expectations and the current state. So when you combine like those three factors into, on top of just whatever the emotion is that they're feeling, then the God piece comes in, because that emotion is like the people in the Holocaust, for instance. Each person was going through a Holocaust, a camp, but because of each person's upbringing and their expectations and their family and their genetics, everybody was experiencing it slightly differently, even though everybody was in the same place. It was from the same area, whatever. Like, I think that the God piece comes in because each emotion still is influenced by each individual, and each individual, I think, is kind of God.
Yeah, that makes sense. But it's more about like the consciousness experiencing those things, and the emotions are potentially like I would agree, the most raw form of experience. And it's not, I believe it's not necessarily about like the positive or negative aspects that one assigns to any particular emotion, but more about the emotion itself. Like, almost what is there's different ways to quantify it, but the amplitude of it, or the uniqueness, or the specialness, or something like that. Do you feel like that's what you believe, or something else?
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Something I think about, abstract thought. One of the other things that I'm curious about is fears in general, and I think I mentioned this before, but I'm somewhat different than you, that I kind of define my outlook to the world negatively. I would still say I'm actually a very optimistic person, but I focus more on like the negative side of things. One of the things I say a lot is don't be motivated by fear, or like run towards fear. One of the things I've come to believe more recently is embrace pain or sadness or some of these more negative emotions. So I'm curious, for you, what would you say your biggest fear is, and is that something you think about?
Yeah. Honestly, I think it stemmed from when my parents got divorced, and me being the oldest of five, and like kind of make sure that everything was kind of going well for my siblings. Honestly, my biggest fear is not for myself, but it's actually for my siblings to honestly like be happy and like kind of have the ability, not even achieve their goals, but have the ability to like pursue their goals. So my biggest fear would honestly just like making sure that it would be like losing a relationship with them, or something terrible happening to them. Honestly, even more so than myself. I think I'm very self-sufficient, and I think I know myself very well, to the point where like, and I've said this to people, where like I could even like die like right now, and I'd just be so happy. Like, there's like, this world was just amazing. I had a better life than I ever could have asked for. Yeah, like. So when it comes to fears, like I really don't have any fears for myself. Like, legitimately, it's just like making sure my siblings are kind of okay, and like ideally they come to this point where I'm at, where it's like they can die happy, and like maybe they've reached out, to be honest. But it's just really just making sure that things are okay for them, because I feel like I've kind of got everything kind of like not figured out, because no one has everything figured out. But I feel like it's like there is so little downside for me right now.
Yeah, it feels right, perhaps.
Yeah.
I know we talked about this before, but I still don't fully understand, like, how did you get to this point? Because I feel like that is a point many of us, myself included, are striving to get to. Like, how did you get to this point of total, or at least a high amount of acceptance for yourself? Um, was there any point in the past when that happened, or do you feel like this is something you've always had?
Yeah. You know, I really do think it has to do with like having habits that have to do with suppressing my ego. Like,
Okay, I can believe.
yeah, like I really think like in college I used to watch a nature documentary every day. Like I'd wake up and I'd throw it on while I was making eggs or doing whatever. Like it would just be on. And if it wasn't a nature documentary, it'd be a history documentary. Like there's always something that kind of reminded me how little I am and how insignificant I am. And like that's how I would like start a day, and then at the end of the day I'm on Reddit looking at history pictures. So and then I go for a run in the middle of the day. And then also like there's another thing. It's like everything is somebody's passion project. It's their whole life. Like you could write a book on this cup, not even this microphone, like literally this cup on like someone who started the company, the design behind it, whatever it may be, the physics behind it. Like it's like you can the universe is in this cup, like legitimately it's in this cup. So I think that when I kind of like wrap my head around this like consistently, it's almost it's just like everything is just perfect, like legitimate, like everything is just perfect, and because of that I've just like fully accepted that like everything is
That's amazing. And I think the key part of that, just to repeat it, is having habits that suppress your ego generally. Because I do feel like, and this is something I've come to recently, but it's like a natural state to everyone, I feel like, that this acceptance and this curiosity and that literally extreme case, like I could just die and like it would be okay. Like I'd still be happy. But I feel like that's the trick. Like, how does one actually suppress their ego or transcend it in different ways? Because I do feel like I've gotten close to that, but I feel like, at least for me, and I would guess for almost everybody, like your ego is something that follows you around.
Yeah.
And for me, at least as I've felt like I've gotten closer to that sort of oneness, like perfection, like everything is right as it should be, that has also been ego inflating. So I feel like it's sort of like followed me as I've gotten closer to that too. But there's a lot of different ways to approach it.
Yeah. So you know, there's an interesting. It's a passage in Brothers Karamazov where one of the brothers is essentially he's discussing children, and he's saying that children are so innocent to the point that they legitimately are a different species. So, like he says, like the metaphor he uses, like they haven't bitten the apple. Like they don't have that sin. Like adults have that sin where we know right from wrong, but children are like legitimately a different species. And I think that we all have been kids. Like we didn't have egos. Like we were one with the world. Like we were that. Like there's no other way to put it. And I think that honestly, like I have younger cousins that I see, and like seeing them as kids and like the innocence that they have, like on it, like they could die and they would be happy because they're not worried about what would happen afterwards. Like they've reached, like we've like you stray from that as you get older because you've eaten the apple. And I think that if you could kind of just like recognize like this is where we're from, like we are children at heart, like we not even we're children at heart, we know how to experience life.
Every single one of us,
every single one with no ego. We've gone through life and we're just happy, like and now all of a sudden you get wrapped up in like whatever, like the day-to-day stresses of adult life. But like you know you've done this before. So anyway, I think that I'm not sure what the question was, but I think that is kind of something to at least observe. It's like we've done it before. Like it's just going back into it as opposed to learning it.
Yeah, I think that's wise. Okay, so the last question I have is, I know you talk to a lot of people and ask them very curious questions. What are some of the most interesting or surprising things that you've learned about someone, and who was it?
Okay, this is a good question. Most interesting. Oh, let me think about this one. I think I'll kind of switch up your question.
Sure.
So I don't know if I'm allowed to do that, but I'll kind of switch it up.
Yes, you are.
I think that when I think back to all these historical experiences and kind of what it was like to essentially be in different scenarios, there are two that stick out to me. So I'll say like the two experiences, I guess, that stick out to me. I think that the first that I think about like was somewhat consistently is being a fighter pilot in World War One. I think planes were just invented in like the preceding decade, and now all of a sudden you've got a gun mounted to your plane and you've got to fight, go up there, and you're literally like fighting people in other planes on these with machine guns, and you don't even know if the plane's gonna fly, and you've got to go up there. You're whatever. Like I think that the like putting myself in the shoes of a fighter of a pilot before that is like fascinating. Like, and then you go up like the nerves, and then you go up, and then you're flying it, and you land, and you've won, or you
seems like a surreal experience. Like like you wouldn't have even conceived of that in your own life as that fighter pilot a couple years prior.
Yeah, and you're a farm hand in somewhere in Austria 3 years before, exactly. And it's like, and now you're fighting like now you got to fight the Allies, or like you're on the Allies, you got to fight the Axis. Like I think that's one experience where I'm just like, holy shit, like so any of those pilots I think would be interesting. And then there are people who went up and they were better than other people, and they shot down 50 planes, and like everyone whatever celebrates them back home, but you're like, he just literally killed somebody on like someone's son or someone's nephew, whatever it may be, and like everybody has a story where it was involved in that. So I think that's one. And then in ancient Rome, I think it was the Battle of Cannae, they were surrounded by, I believe it was the Carthaginians in Northern African group, and the numbers vary, but I think it's between 50 and 80,000 Romans were surrounded for 2 days. And what happened was there's a battle that kind of mimics this in Game of Thrones, but eventually they get saved. What happens is they're encircled, and there's like, I'll say 65,000 Romans in the middle, and the Carthaginians would put their shields up, stab through the shields, move in, stab shields, and they did it for 2 days.
Wow,
and they killed everybody. And like to be a Roman soldier, like in the middle of that, you just wait, like
just coming towards you.
Insane, like truly insane, and like that happened, like that, and like so anyway, it's like 65,000 football field getting killed over 2 days, just slowly, whatever, shields go in, stab through the shield, and like so anyway, I think like that is just like such a fascinating thing to have lived through. Like obviously you died, but like just like things like that, I think are like, again, like you talk about like not being able to relate, and like people living in fully different universes than you. Like honestly, like same thing that these Roman soldiers were farmers. I'm sure a year before they get conscripted to the army, and now they're getting killed. Yeah, like it's just like hard to even fathom. So anyway, kind of skirted the answer, but I think a couple of those experiences are kind of what I think about.
I don't usually do this, but do you have any questions for me?
Do you think about the human experience at all? Like, what's your version of thinking about other people? I know you said that you've kind of struggled with empathy before.
I definitely feel like I do. For me, and I touched on this before, but to say it more explicitly, I just feel like I felt so overwhelmed in my life for so long that even getting to a point where I had the capacity to look outside myself at all was a long time. Maybe it was like the first 27 years of my life, or 30 years of my life or so. So I haven't thought about it too much, perhaps a little bit in the past couple months. So maybe that's an interesting perspective to share, like what has that been like for the first time. I think for me, the way I've related to everybody else historically has been more trying to uncover fundamental truths. Because I'm sort of like, okay, well, if this thing is true about me, and I know not everything about me is true about somebody else, but if I could understand what are the fundamentally true things about me, and perhaps the fundamentally true things that I believe at least about humans in general, then I can understand people better through that, have better intuition about them, feel closer to them. And that's, I don't know if other people think of it that way too often, but that's how I thought most about it. And I felt like last year for me was not understanding too much about fundamental truths, but it felt like a lot more. And I felt a lot more connected to people through that. And I did sense some of that oneness and perfection that you talked about before. But I realized in the past couple months that I'm not satisfied with that. And I think that you actually do have to have sort of this reality of who is this other person right here sitting next to me, not just the like fundamentally true things about them that are true about everybody, but who actually is Tommy and all these other people around me that I feel interested in. And that's brought me to, it's been hard, honestly, because I felt, as I've started to feel a little bit more empathetic, it's felt like, there's great things about people and you can share in some of their joys, but you can also share in a lot of their pain. And as one who has felt for a long time overwhelmed with their own pain, as I'm sure a lot of people do, that felt hard. It's like, wait a second, like I'm signing myself up to feel all this pain for other people too, on top of everything that I just feeling. But I'm sure everybody feels like that. And the interesting thing to me, I had a conversation with my mom recently, actually, and we've always gotten along super well, but her and I hadn't been super close, or at least the depth of all the stuff we talked about hadn't been close for super deep for a long time. But she had a hell of a time, to say the least, with the divorce of my dad. And she went through a lot of pain in her own life for 5 to 10 years after that. And I talked to her about it, and she said something interesting where she said that towards the end of the divorce, she just didn't really feel much of anything at all. And then she kind of went through this 5 to 10 years of her life with feeling a huge amount of pain and suffering, like after the fact. This was after the divorce was like finally all sinking in. And then she got to this place now where, not perfect, but like really feels much more of the fullness of life. And the interesting part of it, which, because I was kind of having these doubts, are like, wait, like, okay, this sort of feels intuitively right to me. Like I should be more empathetic. I should focus more on other people. But why am I doing this? Like, it just feels hard. But the thing she said that resonated with me was, in the depth of her pain, she really started to feel connected to people for the first time, at least in that part of her life. And that started to happen to me a little bit more as well. So that's felt really interesting. And for me, that's always the thing that I've struggled with. Like, I would classify my biggest fear as loneliness. And I've never, at least I don't think I've ever felt like deeply connected to almost, or like unconditionally connected, at least to anyone. So I've always been searching for that. So that feels exciting to me. But yeah, I guess to recap, it's like starting with myself first and foremost, and then like fundamental truths. And then some of those fundamental truths led me to understand more about the reality of other people. And that's still a journey I'm going on.
Yeah. Sometimes it's more difficult too, honestly, with family than friends, because it's like it's a different dynamic where like friends you could kind of be like more informal.
Yeah.
As opposed to...
And also with family, there are these patterns that you fall into, right? And it's incredibly hard to change those patterns if it's just the way you've interacted with people. And with everybody's family, there's just a huge depth of experience that you've had with them. So unpacking that, especially years after the fact, can feel like a lot.
Yeah.
But it's valuable.
And I'll add too, is like I go through these, like I'll look, whatever, I'll think about the lives of all these historical figures, and I'm like, I have my parents right in front of me. Like they lived for 30 years before I was even alive. And it's, you see, like we're moving right now. So my mom's packing up whatever, a bunch of old pictures, and I'm seeing these photos of my parents young, and like it hits me. I'm like, whoa, like they've got these such rich experiences.
And I think there is a lot to be said for sort of just being more chill and like having a good time and that sort of stuff. But it's interesting to me that a lot of these people are right there next to you, even like your grandparents or something like that. But how many times has anyone really gone to their grandparents and really asked them about their life before they're gone? And I think people realize they should have done this like after the fact. But I think it speaks to a broader point of, it's interesting to me that it's hard, or at least not the norm, to have some of these conversations that go to the depth of what people's experiences have been and what their beliefs are potentially.
Yeah.
Because I think there can be a lot of fear and anger or just pain that sparks generally, but I think it's worth doing.
Yeah, yeah, and that'll be my main takeaway. I think. Yeah, I've got to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Tommy, thank you very much for joining me. Yeah,
Thank you.
I know it was a wide-ranging conversation, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you. This is incredible.